Okay, guess let's get started. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the Intro to Python workshop. I'll be running you through the basics of how to code in Python, and in the end, I will demonstrate how to code a very simple guessing game, which we'll actually end up completing together. Hopefully, you guys will be able to also, put your input in and we can go through it together. All right, so I guess a little bit about me. My name is Julie. I'm a machine learning engineer at Cache for Square. I just finished my bachelor's degree at the University of Toronto, and I completed a computer science specialist. So the main language I actually work with is Python. And since my job entails designing and building machine learning pipelines, which are basically the path that needs to take from, like the data needs to take from conception of the machine, learning models all the way through to get the predictions and everything. This all ends up actually happening in Python. It's like a backend language. I'll go into more details about it. So I've been coding in Python for about 5 years now, and I use it every single day at work. So hopefully you guys will know a little bit by the end of this. So I'm sure most of you have heard about Python, and if you can't tell, it's from what I've said also, it's clearly my favorite language. It is a high-level general-purpose programming language. It was designed to emphasize code readability, which is also really helpful for you to understand it. So it's like something that when you read it, it's like English. So it makes it really nice to learn at first. Languages like C, C++, and Java have a lot of really kind of hard to read syntax, and you have to learn a lot of different things. And so it's not as clear. And even like the way you're supposed to code it, like you have to use semicolons and these curly brackets, so it can get a little confusing, whereas Python, super simple, it's just line by line, and it literally reads like English. So it's very, very good to learn Python first as a beginner language. It's an object-oriented program which relies on the concept of classes and objects, which I'll kind of go into towards the end. And it basically is like, if you can imagine, classes are like blueprints, and the actual individual instances are like when you build the house or you make it. So it kind of brings up that blueprint and builds it into actually something that you can use. So you can kind of think of it like that. So I guess what we're actually going to do. Also, like I said, feel free in the chat to like ask questions. I have it here, and if you want, you can even raise your hand. And if I don't answer, you can feel free to like unmute yourselves and you can just ask questions. It's totally fine. Where was I? So basically what we're going to cover is I'm going to give you like a little high level to why you should even learn about Python. And then we're going to go into just the intro of coding, some like prereqs that you should know. And then we'll go into some basic structures, some logic. And the last thing we'll do is we'll actually end up coding together. And hopefully that part will be a little bit more participation so that you guys can also see, I guess, firsthand, like what the structure is to actually build something. So I guess the first question is, why Python? So it's really easy to learn and use. Python acts like pseudocode, so it's readable, like I mentioned before, and it's not as technical as other languages. It also has an extensive library that supports common tasks. Libraries are like pre-written Python classes, which contain ready-to-use features and functions depending on your specific needs. For example, if you want to plot, a specific set of points, you could use a library called matplotlib. Or if you want to use specific math functions, Python has a built-in math library, which contains every single function you can think of. The last reason is because Python is one of the most marketable languages. There's a high demand in the tech industry for people who know how to code in Python. And because of the traction that Python has, you can find lots of resources online because there's so many people in the community. So even if you get stuck, you have like a bug or anything, the amount of forums and the amount of like people who've had the same problems is incredible. And like you can get answers super quickly with an easy Google search, just because it's so popular. Whereas like with some other language, sometimes like you can have a bug and it will be so hard to try to figure out what is wrong. And when you try to Google it, like you won't find much. So that's like the really nice thing about Python as well. Next. So the future. So actually, Python is the #1 used language for artificial intelligence and machine learning. And as we know, our world is kind of moving towards that, where a lot of things are getting automated. ML is being used in almost every company at some capacity to improve like user experience, to improve the product itself. So it's definitely a really important skill set to have going into the next 10 years, regardless of what you do. Knowing even a little bit of Python can really help make even your university career much more easier if you learn how to code. And as well as like even like at work, knowing how to code does give you that extra advantage over people who don't. So it's definitely a really important thing to know how to do. In addition to that, it's like integrated, like the Python itself is integrated in most machine learning tools like Google Cloud, platform, Amazon's platform, like they have so many libraries. So it's like the easiest way to actually end up doing machine learning is through Python. So let's go to the next one. I'm going to check if anyone's asked any questions. You guys seem to be fans of C. It's not fun when you have segmentation faults, I'll tell you that.
Also, just saying, if you have a question that you want to be answered, don't type it into the chat. It's going to get quickly overwhelmed. Use the Q&A feature.
Is there a Q&A feature? Ooh, are you looking for it? Okay, no one's asked a question. Yeah, you guys are typing a lot on the chat. All right, Leo, I'll see. Can you just keep me updated if there's questions? Because it's a little hard for me to go between everything. Okay. All right, so I guess one of the things I mentioned before is some prereqs, some things you should know before we start talking about code. One of the biggest things, and I think it's the easiest way that you guys can think about coding, I think most of you are somewhat, grade 10, grade 11, 12s maybe. So if you haven't been in grade 11, you probably haven't seen functions, but at least in grade 10, you see like y equals mx plus b, right? Coding is a lot like that, especially in Python, where you have a function that you define, some variable, and inside that function, it does something. So just like mx plus b, you have m, which is, it's always a constant. X is a changing variable, right? Depending on what it is, that it doesn't matter. We leave x as it is, and b is also a constant. So in code, we do stuff that's very similar. You pass in exactly like this, f of x, you pass in some kind of parameters, you do something in the function, and you return it. You don't always have to return it, but let's just say that's the basics. The other thing that's kind of, I guess, I like to know how it all works is that code always ends up being written when it gets to the computer level to binary. Binaries are just zeros and ones. You can convert your decimal system into binary. I'm not really going to go too much into it. It's an easy Google search, but binary will be important for the next part, which we're going to start talking about like different structures. So does anyone have any questions at this point? I don't think so. So I'm going to keep going. So the basic structures in Python. The first one is Booleans. So Booleans are basically your true and false values, zeros and ones. And so in Python, the way we use Booleans, it's an uppercase and you use true, or you do uppercase with the false. So over here at the first line, I basically set a variable and I made it equal to true. Now when I write not in front of the variable, it switches because not true is false. And then this actually doesn't change the variable. So I actually have to redefine it in the next line, which is what we do over here with the equal sign. Oh, sorry. And by redefining it now, when I return this value and I call Python is fun again, it says it's false. Like I said, Booleans are really straightforward. It's just true is 1 means go, basically. False, anytime you see false in it, it won't actually end up running the code when you start using it in like statements and stuff.
Somebody actually asked the question 2 minutes ago. They said, how did you learn Python? I hope this isn't bad timing.
Oh, no, it's not. I can definitely just before we continue. So I actually went into computer science not knowing how to code at all. So I learned Python in my first year class, CS 108. being in computer science, which was kind of funny. So yeah, I learned it in first year.
Somebody else asks about Booleans. Can I use a Boolean as a number?
If you use a number and you say it's a Boolean, it's just going to know it's a number. So you really can't. In other languages, sometimes you can, but in Python, if you just set like your variable to a number, it's just going to say it's a number. That's the thing about Python. You can't actually declare the types, whereas in other languages you can. So no, you can't. Not in Python, at least. Oh yeah, there's like memes all over this thing. I don't know why. Also at my company, we always do memes in all of our eng learns. So that's kind of the presentation you guys didn't get to. So integers, since we were talking about numbers, in Python, you can do any kind of math you can think of. I have over here 3 + 4, 7 calculator. You can, again, set the variables to actually be the product of the values. There's negatives, all the fun stuff. There's also floats and all these other things. Floats are basically like your decimal numbers. And there's like so many different kinds. You have really long numbers you can go up to. There's like limits in Python. At one point, you actually end up crossing over. There's only so many bits your integers can actually hold. But yeah, this is just like very basic. Integers are, I think, pretty straightforward. So to clarify, what happens when I set? Oh, you want to actually try it? I can pull up the terminal. So I actually like it being more interactive. So can everyone see my terminal? Yes, I hope so. So let's actually just open up a Python instance. Okay. Oh, you want me to do this. What do you guys think is going to happen? All right, a equals true. All right, a plus 5. So it actually takes it in as if it's a 1, and it gives you a 6. And if I were to say b equals false, and I do b plus 5, 0 plus 5, 5. Please zoom into your screen. Yep, I got you. Okay. Can you guys see now? I have a really big screen, so sometimes it's a bit hard to see. Yes. Okay, cool.
Yeah, there's a question related to this one actually. Michelle asks, are 0 and 1 anything in Boolean?
What do you mean by that? I think you're gonna have to clarify your question. You can like unmute yourself, feel free, if you don't feel like shy. Or you can just type in the chat. It's up to you. I'll give you like a sec to decide what you're gonna do. Oh, I think she got nervous. That's okay. All right. I guess I'm gonna go back if anyone else has any questions. I think Michelle left. But I guess the answer would be no. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is strings. So as you could tell, since when you just write like any, like you just start typing like a name or any like anything like that, it's going to think it's a variable. So if you try to call something that you haven't defined, it's going to give you an error. So in order to actually make like a sentence or use a character or a word, you have to put it in the quotes, right? And so if you look here, what we have is I've basically defined my name, Julie, and then I wrote my last name, Quintero. Now, you can add strings together, and what it will do is it will concatenate, which just means it'll combine them. And I put a space in between because otherwise it would just be my name with no space. And so when I add it together, it returns Julie Quintero, right? I think, is there any more questions before I continue? No, I think you guys are good. So this is, like I said, very straightforward. Lists are a little bit more complicated, so I'm going to take my time with this one. But basically, lists are a way that you can keep multiple strings, integers, floats, Booleans in one place. The nice thing about Python is that you can have mixes. So you don't only have to have strings or only integers or only Booleans. You can have a mix of them both. So if we look here, the first thing I did was I wrote my favorite movies and I defined them. And then I wrote 5 random, the Fibonacci sequence, the first 5. And if I add them together, it will make the list. And it does not care about types, which is really, really helpful for a lot of the like machine learning stuff. Because other languages do care about types. And so it can be a little bit difficult to try to do these kind of things. We can use, so Python has a lot of built-in functions, and you can read all about it in docstrings, but the most common one I would say for a list that you should know is append. And append, what it does is that at the end of the list, it adds it. So a list is ordered. You can have it, like Python has some of the best like algorithms to actually sort your list super fast. And so if I were to sort this list, it would go by the numbers first, and then it would go alphabetical, which is, if I were to sort it. Do you guys have any other questions? Why is there an atmosphere to your last name? Can you append to the middle of the list? Can you append? It will always append, always goes to the back of the list. But if you wanted to add something to the middle of the list, the best way to do it would be, how would I do it? You would probably have to split the list and just specify exactly where you want it to go. So less you can actually show you what I mean. Currencies. If I have a list like this, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And I append anything to it, it's going to go to the back, right? If I want to add something to the middle, I would have to specify, and I can change a value. So I wouldn't be able to add it per se in the middle. I would have to actually split it, add it, and then add the end tail. So what do I mean by that? So it would look something like this. So I would grab, this is list indices. So I would grab from the beginning, which is 0 till 1, 2, 3, the second one, right? And if I add another number, let's say 8 in between, let's use another one because I already used 8. And then I add the rest of the list to the end, which I'll go over this in a second what I'm doing. You would actually end up with the list, well, the value now being in the middle. So that would be the only way to kind of do it in the middle. Otherwise, it always goes to the end. So I hope that answered your question. But basically what I did here is that in Python, you can specify. So you start from 0. So this is the 0th. This is the first, second. And when you actually say, so the first value will include it, but the second one is not inclusive. So if I say up to 2, it will grab everything, but it won't grab the actual value. So it would end up being, it'll grab 0, 1, and then when it gets to 2, it actually won't include this value. So show you what I mean. If I just grab this, it's going to shorten the list and only be length of 2, right? Which is why over here I had to repeat it, because over here now it will include that value. And this, when I don't put anything at the end, it means go all the way to the end. You can also go backwards and list them with, like, you say -1, or grab the last thing on the list, which is 8. And you can also actually grab things from the back. So you can do like a -4 till the end, which is the same thing as saying grab from 2 all the way to the end. Can get a little confused. And yeah, much that on list. I'm going to stop here because that's basically the structures go over. There's a lot more in Python, but that's what we're going to use in the demo. So if you have questions about structures, now would be the time to ask. Otherwise, I'm going to go into logic. Okay, I think you guys are good. So the next part is about logic. So let's chat about logic. I will tell you that most automation and most things you will see is done with if and else statements. Python has a really nice feature that you can also specify in between called elifs. So over here in the beginning, I did a found equals false. And so if you do if found, which is basically saying if false, right, it would say print found you. But because it says if false, it actually won't print anything. But when I put the not in front of it, right, and I call print found you, it will print back and return to me found you. Now, if you look over here, same thing, found is still false, right? And I write an else statement instead, the second one will get printed. So this is really helpful when you have cases. In Python, there's more elegant ways once you have like a lot of cases to write it out. But if and else is probably going to be the first things you'll learn. I'll show you an elif statement. An elif statement is basically the same thing as an if statement. It just goes after an if statement. So you could say, again, I'll just use if found equals false. And let's say I use lost equals true. Right? I have two variables. And if I call an if function, I go if found and lost, what that's going to do is that this will only pass if found is true and lost is true, right? And it'll go into this block. And in this block, I'm going to have a print statement. And it's going to print first block, right? Otherwise, I'm going to do an elif. So this is a second condition. So Python reads from top to bottom. Right, so it reads the first one. If it passes the first one, it will stop and it won't read the rest. But if it doesn't pass the first one, it's going to go into the second one. It's going to read the elif and try to figure out if this is true, then it will print it. So let's do found or lost. Right? And that is going to print second block. In the last case, I'm just going to write else, which means if neither of these pass, the first two, then the last one's going to print. Okay. Now, if you guys want to write in the chat and tell me which one do you think is going to be printed, based on found being false and lost being true, what's going to be printed? No search for Python yet. No, they have case statements, though, you can use. Second block. Yeah, that's correct. And let's see. There you go. Actually, quite simple. And that's it. All right, next. Built-ins that we're going to use today. So length is a very common one, and it goes with anything that's an iterable. An iterable in Python is basically anything that you can loop over, or you could kind of, it's like a sequence of objects. So a list is an example of an iterable because you have a bunch of things inside of it. And so if I called length on a list, it would tell me how many things are actually in this list. The other things are like things like dictionaries and tuples, but those are things that we're not really going to go into today. Those are more different structures that are kind of similar to lists, but they have their own features. So if we look over here, the second one I want to teach you guys is in. In basically checks, it's like a true or false statement that gets returned, and it checks if something is inside of another something. So you can check for a letter inside of a word. You can check for a string or an integer inside of a list, so a specific object inside of a list. So you just check it to see if something exists in the variable you have set. So if you remember from previously, I wrote a list of my favorite movies, and so I check, is Star Wars in my favorite movies, and it returns true. And then I check, is S in Samantha, which returns true. And I check, is Superbad in my favorite movies, and it returns false, because Superbad was not one of the string values I had in the original movies. All right, I think that's it for that one. guys. Oh, don't worry. So the common uses for list are when you want to keep track of things. For example, you can have a list of, let's say you have a car. You have a car class and you want to keep track of all the different kinds of cars that exist, all the brands. The list would be a good thing to actually use because you can keep track of all the different brands. Right? You have Mercedes, BMW, you have Tesla, and etc. So in your class, if your car class, you can have that list. It's basically just to keep track of things. It's very useful for that. When you want to organize, it's one of the basic data structures that you end up using for, you know, anything to do with, like, you want to keep track of users. You have a list of users usually, right? You can even have a list of like classes once you start getting a little bit more complicated. You can literally put anything in a list, which is a really nice part about Python. And because Python has so much functionality with their lists, where you can like add things, you can sort special sorts, it ends up being one of the most useful parts of Python. So I would say lists are something really cool, and they have really cool syntax for you to actually create lists in like one line, which again, I'm not going to go over today. You'll see it in some of my code. If we have time, I can go into it a little bit later. I think this part is probably the hardest part, so I'm going to take some time with functions. Some people get a little confused with this, so feel free to ask questions. Basically, with functions, we have over here, you define a function. You can call it whatever you'd like, and you have parameters. And these parameters are what ends up getting used in the function. They only exist within your function. So if you try to use my params outside here and I tried to call it, it wouldn't work, right? So it only exists where you defined it within the actual function. And over here, all I'm doing is just adding one to this very simple function. So if my argument is equal to 3 and I use my function and I call my argument, it's going to go into the code. It's going to do 3 plus 1 and it's going to return it. And so over here we see it gets returned. You can actually store return values into variables, which is what we've seen before, or you can just have it returned. It really depends on what your functionality is. So if you look over here, I can also include other statements within. It doesn't always have to, the return just has to be at the bottom if you want it to actually save the value. Otherwise, it only exists within where you called the function. So if you look over here, it prints the argument before, because my params was originally 3, my argument, right? And then you add it and it returns the 4. So that's why you have 3 and you have 4. I think now we can actually get into the demo, which is a little bit more fun. And you guys can work a little bit on that. So I'm just going to open it up here. I'm going to zoom in. Let me know if you guys can see it. Let's see if I can see this one. Okay, so I'm going to show you what it's supposed to look like. Basically, we're going to run a game. It's going to be a guessing game. So what it is, if you guys have ever played Hangman, it's kind of like Hangman. You have 3 tries to guess the letters. But first, we need to actually end up coding it properly. So there's parts of it that are not implemented just yet. And so we're just going to get started over here. All right. Before I get started, does anyone have any questions? Let's check. Okay, this one's a more interesting question. So, all right. If you define a function inside an if conditional, then call it, it should work. But if you call it again in an else or in a different if later on, it wouldn't work. Okay. Well, let's see. Let's say if we're going to use the found logic again, okay? So if found, right, and we're going to define a function, and we're not going to pass any parameters for now. What we'll do is just have it over here exist and say print function 1. If I go into an else statement, right, and I try calling my function, I think is what your question was. The question is, would it work? Hope that was your question. And then call it, it should work. But if you call it again in an else statement or in a different later on, it wouldn't work. Right. Oh, that's not what I meant. Sometimes. Okay. Call my function, and I will also call it above. So the question is, will it run or not? Right? I didn't call it in the if found. So technically the only code that would run is this else statement because found is false right now. So the question is, what kind of error am I going to get? And if you look here, oh, that was my fault because I wrote an extra line. Oh, I'm going to have to rewrite it. Okay, let's do this again. If found, define my function. And we're going to print my function. Okay. And then else my function. I hope you guys can see it. Okay. And it's exactly what you said. It is not defined, so it would not be able to run. But now, if I change found to equal to true, right? And it actually won't run because I don't call the function inside. But if I call the function inside here, after I define it, it would print my function. Because it, like I said, either if this happens, this won't happen. But if this doesn't happen, sorry, if the if doesn't happen, then the else will happen. So I hope that answered your question. I don't think there's any more. I actually never tried that either. That was a really interesting question. I figured that's how it would work, but I was curious to see. You had a very specific use case. I don't think I've seen many people try to put a defined function inside of a conditional. That's definitely interesting. All right, so basically what we're going to do is, like I said, we're going to create our fun game, our guessing man game. This code's also on GitHub. You guys feel free to go check it out. You can like build off of it. You can practice. It'll basically be the to-dos. And then I guess after the workshop, I can upload my masterclass, which is the actual code with the correct answers. So I'm going to run this really quickly so you can see it. Showing it too much. Okay, so this is how the game should look. And so we're going to play. You gotta get someone tag in the chat. What should I guess? By the way, they're like tasty treats. So think of treats when you're trying to guess this word. A. Cool. Let's go for A. A. I enter it. Great guess. Here's your new hint. That's what it looks like now. You see that there's one A that's been filled. Zoom in a bit more. I got it. Okay, one sec. There's a chance. It's going to zoom. Is that better? Or do you want it more zoom? Can't see your second screen. Can't see the one over here, like the letter game. Okay, E. It looks like you guys can't see it. Okay, cool. Can anyone else not see it? Everyone else see it? I don't know. Let me see the chat. It's good now, thanks. Okay, cool. all right. Okay, so you guys guessed it right. Let's do one that probably won't exist, which is Q, right? So you have wrong guess, you have 2 guesses left. So I'm actually just gonna butcher it on purpose for now. I'm gonna go for T. Oh, that was not what I was, oh, I know which one this is. Okay, so I'm gonna go for D. I get those wrong. And if I pick M, for example, I get kicked out of the game. And it tells me what the right one. It was white chocolate cookie. Okay? So really important things from the game. You get 3 tries. After the 3 tries, you get kicked out of the game. Every time you get it right, you get the hint. It has to be added to the actual word. So there's a couple things we got to keep track of, right? We got to keep track of how many guesses you have left, right? You have to keep track of, did I find out what, did you get the right guess or not for the letter? In addition to that, you have to keep track of, did I get the right word? Is like the word complete? Did I guess everything? Okay. Some of this logic I've already worked into it, which is a little bit harder. So I'm first going to like walk through the code, right? And help you guys understand it. So quick thing about Python, when you want to run a Python file, right, you have to write this, if name equals main, which basically tells it from down here, I want this to run. A lot of like C and other code have something very similar to this. And if you see here on Python, a little play button will show up. Now, you don't need this if you're going to run it off the terminal, but since I'm running it off here, that's why I have it here, right? I could have like this code in the class, or I could put it in functions. But for the sake of simplicity and for us to be able to quickly iterate through it, I put it here, right? So anything that gets over here will get run. Now, the function I put up here, right? I define it at the top. So since it's defined up here, I can call it inside of this, right? So when I run this file, it's going to run this line first, then this line, then this line, this. What it's going to do here is that it's going to just understand and read that I have this function called get new word, and I understand what it is. Yes, you guys have questions?
Yeah, we can't see Python very well, or like whatever IDE you're using.
Yeah.
Much better.
Much better. Yeah, see, like this big screen is amazing for me. Not so nice when I'm sharing. Okay, thank you for letting me know. Can everyone see it now better, right? Okay, cool. All right, so like I was saying, we have this if name. I can just repeat it, right? So this is what is going to get run. So all this code gets run, right? This code gets understood, right? But if I actually don't call get new word, which I have here, this code would never run, right? I actually have to call it, right? Like any other function. And if I do a print here, actually I remember, but I'm 95% sure this won't run off of here. Freak. All right, let's run it, which will show up here. Oh, yeah, it does run. But it's proper practice to run it here. I couldn't remember if it runs or not because you just never run it up here. Always in here, and it makes it easier just to do this. All right, let's continue. So, like I said, we need to use a Boolean to keep track if the word was guessed or not. So, in the beginning, you want to initialize it to something. What do you guys think that would be? If we're talking about whether we guess the word or not. You guys can type it if you want. Or I can just give you the answer if no one types it. So we have to set this value of guess to something. What would we set it to? How much code do you typically run? False. Yes. That is correct, Maria. So we set it to false. Cool. Now, how do you guys want to keep track of all the letters that have been picked? What would be something good that if you need a lot of things to put into, right? And you want to keep track of it? Yeah, the list. So the way you initialize an empty list is you can either write the word list and call it, or you can just do the empty like this. I kind of go for this one, a little nicer. All right, next one, we want to keep track of all the correctly guessed letters. So again, we need a list. Yeah, I only taught you the exact things you needed for this. Otherwise, we could be here for like 2 hours. No, I think we could be here for like 10 hours learning Python. There's so much things about Python. Python even has its own like special like syntax that like, nobody else uses. It can get, it's very clean, I'll tell you that. So now we got keeping track of our guessed letters and our picked letters. So this is really important because this is like the right letters versus like everything we've picked, right? So this is actually a subset. I don't know if you guys know what that means. I'm going to assume you do, which means it's like it's inside, like everything that exists here is in here, and then there's extra letters, right? The next part, do we do our function last or first? We'll do the function first, okay? So we actually have to finish the function. So I'm gonna go up here. This is my word list text. I can show it to you guys. It's literally just a text of all the different words I wrote. I was feeling hungry that day when I wrote this. You probably can't see my words, but I'm going to zoom in as much as I can. So yeah, there's like just a bunch of like guessing stuff, right? Oh yeah, the reject stuff. Yeah, I can go into it at the end. It's a little bit more complicated. It's not really necessary for you guys to know just yet, but I will go into it after. So this part is a little bit harder to understand. I didn't really go through it, but basically this does two things. It opens that file for me to actually, and saves it in my file, right? So now I can access the stuff. Sorry. I can access the stuff in my file, right? The reason I use with instead of just open is because anything that I declare within this part, right, within like the indent, because remember in Python, the indent, I can actually, it will close the file at the end. So it's really important with like when you're dealing with files that you open and close them. So I don't have to write a close statement because I have this with function. Yeah, I kind of explained it in the comments. So if you do need to go back, it's all there. And if you have questions, you can just message me. Cinnamon. And then read lines is basically a built-in function that will take all of this and convert it into a list, right? And so it'll read each line and say, this is object 1, this is object 2, this is object 3, and put it in a list. And it will be a string. Now, the kind of funky thing about read lines is that because this is entered, right, it gives this little new line character that kind of looks like this when you like print it, okay? This new line character will give us some weird stuff, so we definitely want to get rid of it. That's why I have this. A.rstrip gets rid of that new line character that gets created when I read this line. This part's going to get a little confusing, yeah. So this is called a list comprehension, which is basically a short way of writing list. There's a for loop in here. I didn't really go over for loops, but basically what it does is that it goes through and each element in the list, so for A in word list, it would go for banana in word list, and it would do all that logic. It will take away the end thing that shows up and then return just banana pie. And then it goes to chocolate cake and does that. And then it goes, so that's why it's called the for loop. You go one, you go into all of these, one by one by one by one. Okay? And now we are going to actually use a library. So I'm actually going to open up the documentation so you guys can see it. But there is a certain library, which is called the random word library. The random, sorry, like number value library. And what it's going to do is that you're going to give it a set of values. We're going to use the length of the list, and we're going to say, pick any random number from 0 to the length of the list. And what it will do is it will return a random number each time so that we can randomly get a word. So I'm going to pull up the documentation so you guys can see it. I will tell you right now, I don't think I have any library memorized. I Google every single time. This is so important. Random number library. I know you guys probably can't see it, so I will zoom in as soon as I open it, okay? Right, so this is the random for Python docs. And this is what you will do, even as much like every programmer does this, doesn't matter how long they've been programming, you will always have to read documentation. So you might as well get into the practice. I usually Control F and I will find random one number. So probably easiest, probably what I have actually. I hope everyone can see this. So we're going to go down here. And I want this is exactly what we want. We want to return a random integer between two values. The value of 0 all the way to the end of our list, right? Now, the thing about Python is that it goes from 0, the length of to get an actual value, it goes from 0 to the length minus 1. So when we write the code, we have to be careful to not use just length. We have to subtract 1. Otherwise, we're going to get really funky code and it's going to break, right? So I'm going to go back. This is what we're going to be using. So I'm going to control copy that. And so I'm going to set my random number equal to, first I have to import it. So we're going to import random. Now we're going to do OB random int. This will random. And that's going to take a second to resolve itself. Okay. All right. And like I said, we're going to go from 0 all the way to the length of our list, which is word list. And we're going to go through -1. Now, I will show you why this is important. Because I think A is still a length, right? And if I use length of A, you guys can see this. We get 6, right? And if I do A of 6, it's going to say list index out of range. Like I said, in Python, we start counting from 0, not from 1. So instead of doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the 6 value. So if I call 5 instead, that would work. And that's why we need this. Okay? So now you have a random number and you want to return the word, a random word, right? So what would you do? You guys can type in the chat if you know the code, what this line would look like. It's one line and it has to do with wordless. Yeah, there it is. So exactly. You take wordless and you would use random number. All right? Cool. Now make sure you're using the square brackets, because if you try to call it like a function, it's not going to like that, right? So the square brackets are for list. You try using these ones, that's for functions. This is not a function. This is a list. Try doing that. Right. A of 4. Yeah. Not callable. You get an error. Okay. So we've figured out our new word. We got our new word. Our currently guessed, I have it as an empty string because I do some funky stuff over here, which is basically how I get rid of the letters. Regex is basically like a pattern finding thing in strings, right? You can substitute things, you can find things, you can group things, you can split things. It's really useful. It's great for especially data cleaning and stuff in code, especially when people have like spelling mistakes, or some people use capital names and then that messes up the code, or dates are spelled differently because some people use only letters, like they say like June 5th instead of like 0605. So like regex is very useful in that case. I'm not really going to go into it too much. Maybe at the end I will. But that's basically what this code does. It just takes every letter from A to Z or capital A to Z and it converts it into this underscore so that, and space, so that it doesn't look like a giant line. So now we're going to do the next one. So once we actually have our currently guessed, which would at first just be a bunch of dashes, we ask, and we call this input. This input basically prints this, and it waits for a user to actually input a value, right? Which is what we saw when I first ran it. So what this is going to do is that once this line gets called, right, it's going to save whatever the user puts in. So in the beginning, I think the first letter we used was A. So it's going to save the letter A into letter guess. Okay? So no questions, so we're good. Let me keep going to the code then. So what we want to do is we want to check to see if the letter has already been picked. And we want to just keep prompting the user, right, until we don't have a letter we haven't seen. So that's why I have a while loop. While loops will just run and run and run until the statement becomes false. So if we want to keep prompting the user, the first thing you got to do is basically just, I'll try to build this one out. I'm going to see if you guys wrote it in the chat because I can't see the chat right now. Oh, thank you, James, for answering the answer for questions. I'll have time for questions at the end if I don't get to them. Also, I'm not really checking the chat that often, so you guys have to put it in the question section. I guess what I'm asking right now is if anyone knows what should go here in this while. So if we're checking to see if the letter has already been picked, right? We do have something that we're keeping track of, right? And we do have the letter. And I did tell you about a function that works to check if things are inside of other things. It also is right here. Something similar, but I'll just explain this one, I guess. I don't think anyone else figured it out, which is fine. So we got over here, we'll check if our letter guessed is inside of the words we've already guessed, which would be the letters already picked. Okay. And this I'll actually check and keep running and say, well, if this letter, which let's say A was already picked, is here, then we're going to just keep asking the user for this other letter because we already have that letter, right? This F stuff formatting is just a nice way of basically taking variable values and just putting it into a string. So when it's printed, whatever is inside of the list of our letters already picked will get printed out here. Okay? Okay, let's keep going then. What we want to actually do is if the letter guessed is in our word, we want to add it to our correct letters, right? So this fills in newly guessed letters into our current guess, right? So what we would want to do is now we're going to play with our list and we have to add things to the list. I did teach you guys about this before. Letter guessed in the list. Yes, that's correct. So what you would do is use the append function and you would go correct letters dot append and you would add letter we guessed. So, okay. Now over here, the next line of this code, what this basically does is that this is a little bit more complicated, but it takes this original string with a bunch of dashes, a currently guessed word, and it fills in all of the places where our letter should go. Now what it does is that it makes reference to the word, the original word that we don't get to see, the user doesn't get to see, and it says, it basically checks if that letter that we're currently at is in that word, and I want to replace that letter inside of our guessed. Otherwise, I want to keep the dashes because I didn't guess it there, right? This logic's a bit harder to go through, but what join does is that it takes a list, right? And it's a bunch of strings, and it will join it all together. It's kind of like a bunch of adds. So imagine if I remember I showed you guys, if I add a bunch of strings together, S, and then R, right? It's just going to return str, right? This join basically does that with a bunch of strings that are inside of a list. So if I had that same list, oh, that's not what I want to do. Undo. Okay. I had this new list, and I had some string values, right? S, D, R, I, N, N, right? If I use that join function I just showed you, and what this says is basically join with nothing in between. If I put a comma, then every single letter in between would have a comma, right? So I even show that to you guys. I understand. Dot join, and I take my list, new list. Now it will return one giant word, which will just say string with a comma after each of the letters. See, S, comma, T, comma, A, comma, A, comma, A. And that's exactly what this does, okay? Again, there's some extra white spaces, so I just get rid of it. So, for example, I have hi, and then a bunch of spaces, right? I'm going to save that. Actually, I can just show you what this. And I do dot r strip. What that's going to do is basically all those spaces I had after the hi are just going to go away. So now it's just hi. So that's what this does. Because sometimes there's some funky spaces that happen afterwards. All right, the next part. We want to check, did we actually end up guessing it? So a really easy way to check is, do we have any dashes left, right? If we don't have any dashes left, that means, or sorry, underscores, that means we've guessed every word, right? I'm going to check if you guys have questions, because I'm going kind of fast now. Exactly. The thing that I put before their join is exactly, yeah, that's correct. So if I were to put like another, I could put like dashes, and it would do like the same thing, except with dashes in between. If I do join and I do just a bunch of stuff, dashes, dash, 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 dash. In between each one, there's going to be 9 dashes, right? But it doesn't actually put it at the last one, so it stops before the last one. So it'd only be the ones in between. Look that up. Okay, where was it? Yes, we were here. So before we actually do this, we have to add this letter to the list of all of our letters picked, right? So we would do a very similar thing that we did up here, except we would use our other list that we're keeping track of, which is our letters already picked, is the one we want to use, right? We go over here, and we do the exact same code we wrote above. Yes. And the reason we have these two, again, is because correct letters only happens if we are in this if statement. So you'll see that down here, we only use this one, right? All right, so let's go over here. Again, I was talking about the underscores. If there's none left inside of it, that means we've probably won the game and we probably want to stop guessing. So it'd be important to update this guessed parameter, which is currently what's keeping us in this loop, along with having enough tries, which we set to 3. So if this is false and not false is true, and we want to now make it the opposite, we would have to make this true, right? This is true. Okay. Let me get that. All right. Otherwise, we haven't actually finished guessing. So what we want to do is tell them to keep guessing, right? So I put this here because what's going to end up happening is that since it gets to this statement and we've already been in the if, it won't even continue over here, right? It will just go all the way back up to this while loop and run it again, okay? And same thing happens here. So if this gets run, right, guess will be true. It's going to go all the way back up to this while loop, and it's just going to not even run this, and it's going to go all the way to the bottom, right? The last thing we have to do is the case that we didn't guess the letter. So in this one, like I said, we have to decrease the guessing chance every time the player guesses wrong. So we do have a variable that is keeping track of that, which is max tries. And over here, we're going to have to play with the intruders. So if anyone knows the actual syntax for this, there's like a short way to do it, and then there's also a quick way, or like a long way to do it. So we do have to make this decrease, right? Max tries has to go down by 1. So I'm going to write it. Oh, the question is, how do I decrease this value? So I have this question, max tries. I have to make it go down by 1, and I need to write it right over here. So what would be the proper value? So you have max tries is equal to something. Yeah. So actually, we put the minus sign. Actually, I don't know if it matters. I usually put the minus signs in the beginning. That's just me. Does it matter? I don't know. Let's see. Minus 1. Oh, wait, that wouldn't work because I have A something else. B equals 8. B equals minus. Yeah, it should work. I just always do it in the front, but yeah, I guess it doesn't matter. So we have that. That's good. And now we have to, again, add it to our list because we are at that point where we got the wrong guess. So we have to still keep track of that value so we can check it later so that they don't try and pick it again. So it's the exact same code that we already wrote. So I'm just going to take it, copy, and paste it, right? And that is pretty much it. So let's try to see if it runs. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to press play. All right. So when you test code, it's really important to do the following. Come up with the scenarios in your head. Think about every single use case. And what I mean by that is think about how can I make it break? So your job when you're testing is to think of like the smallest edge case that you can think of. You probably can't see this one. So one of our kind of harder edge cases are probably when we lose or when we keep repeating a letter. That was probably the code that was a bit more detailed. So I guess that would be the one I would try. If any of you guys have suggestions of ways we can try to break this code, be my guess. Also, yes, you can do max tries equals max minus 1. It's just a longer way of writing it. And then PyCharm's going to tell you to do it the short way because PyCharm likes everything to be short. Okay. Guess numbers. Ooh. Yeah, let's try to break it with some guess numbers. Why not? It probably, because I didn't give it specific code that says it has to be a letter. That's something we can add. I'll just say it's just false. Yeah. But that would be a good edge case to write in. So if you were to write it in, where would you think would be a good place? You can just give me the line numbers, or I can just tell you what it would be. No, I guessed it. Symbols, yeah, all that stuff would just literally like watch. I can do like this, and that'll be like just a wrong answer, right? Because if you check, we don't have anywhere in this code that says check is this a letter. So if you were going to do that, that's one of the first things you probably want to check. So even before you check whether the letter is inside or has been picked or whatever, you would probably want to do it here, right? Probably want to. Is it a number? Is it a letter or not? Right? What time is it? Good time. Let's check. That's 8:35. Okay. Let's like play the game and see if you guys actually got it to work. And then if we do, I can add that code, okay? So who wants to guess? Letters versus letters that have already been guessed. Probably store the guessed letters in a certain array. That's an interesting way to do it, yeah. All right, you guys are guessing fast. All right, E. Okay, also we have one guess left, so we got to do this in one shot. All right, okay, I'm gonna go with B. Sure, it's a B. No, it's an H. I literally am so blind. Oh, no, we've lost, but that's okay. We can play that. It was sprinkled cupcakes. Okay. We know that way we can lose, so that's good. We have that code that's properly done. So let's rerun it. Let's actually try to guess it this time. All right. A. Oh, I guessed it wrong. Okay. Oh, okay, cool. Let's do that. Ooh, that was a good one. Okay. Guess another one. P. All right. Also, remember, this is pastry, so think of the pastries. Ooh, we have one letter left. Zoom. All right, look, I'm going to go with T. Ooh, that was a good guess. All right, guys, we only have one guess left, so we got to do this. Let's go with R. Oh, I got R. Multiple window. Anyone? Screenshot. Yeah, I can zoom in. I got you. One sec. Is that good? More. I can zoom in more. It's a little bit. Okay, that's better. All right, that's what it looks like. Yogurt. Okay. Why? I think you guys are gonna get it. Yeah, it's frozen yogurt. I'll just write it out now. E and G and U. I had to really think about what was that last one. And we win. Oh, it looks like you got all the logic to work. You got the 2 cases when you lose. We haven't tried the case where the letter repeats, so let's try that one. And then otherwise, we can just make it a little harder. Make sure that people aren't putting bad things. You can always expect that your user is going to do very, very bad things whenever you code. Like I've seen some really interesting, like people writing interesting cases for their code. Come on, zoom in. Zoom. No. There it is. Cool. All right, so if I repeat E, I go again E. Ooh, I go again E. E. Okay, I go F now. So now we're outside of that loop, which is good. It means we exited it, we're not stuck. And now we can just keep guessing. I don't know what this word is. C. I was wondering this too. If you type the entire word, ooh, I don't know. We can try. What's something else double F at the end? Cream puffs. Yeah, I do love cream puffs. All right, if I write cream puffs, I will tell you right now, this will not work. You can also add that functionality. Right? What is it going to do? What did it end up guessing? Does anyone know what it does? Oh, that's not what I wanted. Oh no, go back. Where'd it go? Ah, there it is. Okay. The whole word. So I wrote the whole world. Does anyone have any theories as to what happened? Hello world. I only ate the first letter. So let's think of it logically. So let's walk it through, right? I said this input and I gave it cream puffs, right? It's going to check, is cream puff, which is a whole, like what? It's like a pretty long word, right? Is in letters already picked. This is false, right? Because we don't have this as a word, right? It's not inside of our letters, right? Because it's checking every single value in our list. And right now our list only has E and F, right? We're literally right here. Now it has F and E. So that would be false. So we would go here. Is this in our word? This returns true, right? Because this is the whole word. And it's going to say true. So it's going to go in here. Now, if you write cream puffs again, it's going to say, yeah, this is actually something that's inside, right? So if I run this again, I call cream puffs again, we'll actually get stuck in this while loop. This one. We're going to get stuck here. And it's just going to keep printing and printing and printing and printing if we keep guessing cream puffs. I'll show you. All right, cream puffs again. Watch what happens. We've already picked cream puffs, and so I will write it again. And it would just keep going infinitely, right? That would just stay there. So I wasn't explaining the code. It's going to go over here, and it's going to start doing this check. But because this is checking letter by letter, it's never going to be true. You're basically saying, is this whole thing in one letter? And so this is always going to be false. So what's going to happen is that it's never going to update, right? In conclusion, that was what I wanted to explain. Does everyone get that? Yeah, cool. So basically the logic fails here, right? We could have a guess where it'd be like, if letter guessed is bigger than 1, which is like the length, right? If I guess the whole thing, check if it's just equal to the word, right? Because that would mean the user probably just tried to type in the whole word, right? That's the other case we can do. You guys can feel free to play with this code and actually make it pretty detailed and stuff. I made it really high level, really simple. I didn't put too many use cases or like too many like small cases, but I think I'm gonna leave it like that for now. And I will send it to you. I'm gonna give you guys the GitHub link. So it's literally under my GitHub link. I will probably, you guys want me to paste it in the chat? Or I don't know what the best way will be. I'll probably put it in Discord. I can just put it in like the channel. I'll send it there. I'll link the GitHub. And I will also update my code. My code doesn't have like the fixes to this, but I could put the fixes to these like really interesting use cases you guys have. Otherwise, I think that's pretty much the demo. That's so bright. Yeah, questions, I guess. General questions. I can answer anything really. I tried to make it as I didn't want to do a hello world. If I see another hello world, I thought I was gonna be really annoyed. The white theme, I know, it's so bright. What if you ran join without putting anything at the beginning? Oh, it would break. I'll show you. If you use that just dot join, because it's not joining on anything. Dot join is for, it's like a string function, right? So it's actually the join function that has to be called on a string. So string is a class, join is a function of that class. I didn't really go into classes and functions, but basically join only exists when you have a string, right? If I try to do join on one, it's literally not going to be happy. Join is only for strings, and I call A, I'm pretty sure. Do I have another one that's like, no, let's make it fast. A equals seven, right? And I do one dot join A. It's going to be like, that doesn't exist, right? But if I have a string now, and I just do like an empty string dot join A, it's just going to make this into, yep, ints don't work. So I would have to make a bunch of strings. So if I wrote 1, 2, 3, all right, that's not what I wanted. Yeah, I know. Sometimes I hate writing in the terminal. Okay, and I do, again, the same function, dot join on A, how it work. 1, 2, 3. All right, so it only works with strings. String got to be inside of this, string got to be outside of that. Otherwise, join does not work. Any other questions? Admin and last minute. Oh yeah, there's also this. But what if you wanted to join the list without having it separated by anything? Yeah, that's why you put it like this. Just do empty string. If you just do the empty string, it all gets concatenated. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it, guys. If you guys have any other questions about Python or anything really, just feel free to message me. Happy to chat. You guys had really interesting questions. Some use cases that I hadn't even thought about. Yeah, Python could be an interesting thing. Sometimes you think it's, sometimes it does some weird stuff, but it's not as weird as C. At least with Python, you get good error messages. With C, you get segfault, and then you're sad. But thanks for coming. There is a challenge out. You guys don't have to do it. It's just a fun little thing. You can just make it a little better, the game. You can play multiplayer. Yeah, you can feel free to message me if you want help on it too, or like advice. Okay, I think that's it.
You don't have to do the challenge, but you should try it because there are prizes associated with handing in solutions to the challenges. So make sure you check it out on Hack It Forward.